It was supposed to be a joyous reunion, but the house had other plans. The snow deepened outside Hearth Manor, muffling the world in a blanket of white. Within, the house hummed with a life it hadn't known for decades. The Montgomery family, long divided by grudges and silence, now found themselves gathered under the same roof. The scent of roasted chestnuts mingled with pine, and the warm glow of candles reflected in the polished wood of the grand dining room. Not all who gather this night belong here. Eleanor Montgomery, the matriarch, sat at the head of the table. Age had not dulled her sharp gaze or the iron will that had held the family together for so long, even as time and tragedy pulled them apart. Across from her sat her son, David, his arms crossed and eyes wary, as though the festivities themselves were an affront to his nature. Beside him was Anna, the quiet orphan niece Eleanor had taken in years ago, her expression unreadable beneath her halo of dark curls. Others flanked the table, cousins who rarely spoke outside of obligatory cards, in-laws drawn more by curiosity than familial bonds, and sitting apart, Father Gregor, the local priest who had been invited for the evening's mass. The house itself seemed alive with memory, its walls whispering of forgotten celebrations and shadows of joy. But Hearth Manor bore scars. 20 years earlier, a Christmas Eve fire had consumed its west wing, leaving behind charred timbers and unanswered questions. Most haunting of all was the fate of Peter Montgomery, Eleanor's eldest son. His name was rarely spoken, but his portrait loomed over the mantel, his piercing eyes watching the family's uneasy reunion. As Eleanor raised her glass for a toast, a faint sound carried through the hall, a noise that didn't belong. It was faint but undeniable. Footsteps in the upper corridors, though the family was all accounted for below. Dinner resumed, but the atmosphere grew taut, like a thread stretched too thin. Candles flickered inexplicably, their flames dipping low before recovering. The room, so carefully adorned, seemed darker somehow, the corners deeper, the shadows longer. Victor's furrowed brow, Harriet's fingers clutching the edge of the table, and Eleanor's fleeting glance toward the tree, where the unclaimed gift remained. It was faint at first, almost melodic, yet unsettling. The family froze, their faces a canvas of confusion and unease. Everyone turned their gaze towards the grand staircase at the edge of the room, where the sound seemed to originate. It was the laughter of a child, light, almost playful, but its echo carried an edge that defied explanation. What do you think caused the laughter? Could it be Peter, or something else entirely? Comment your answers below. Father Gregor rose, crossing himself instinctively, his face pale. Eleanor stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, commanding the room back to order. Let's move to the parlor, Eleanor suggests. The family obeyed, filing into the adjoining room where a second tree stood near the hearth. Yet, Hearth Manor was far from silent. The faint laughter persisted, trailing them like an unwelcome guest. Anna, lagging behind the others, paused at the staircase, her hand brushing the banister, her eyes searching the darkness above. What are you looking for, Anna? Eleanor whispers, as if the house itself was asking. Eleanor's voice broke the spell. Anna, Eleanor echoes sharply, the tone carrying years of authority. The girl flinched slightly before hurrying to join the others. As the fire crackled in the parlor, David leaned toward Father Gregor. Meanwhile, Eleanor sat stiffly in her chair, her hands gripping the armrests. Her gaze flickered to the tree again, and the unclaimed gift beneath it. Her voice had been firm earlier, but now, a shadow of doubt crossed her face. And so the family sat, Eleanor murmurs, surrounded by warmth and light, yet unable to escape the growing sense that something was amiss. The house itself seemed to breathe, its long-forgotten secrets stirring awake. The Montgomerys gathered in the parlor, their faces illuminated by the glow of the fire and the faint twinkle of the second Christmas tree. Eleanor, ever composed, sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the unlit chandelier above. She had called this reunion with a purpose unspoken but deeply felt, her resolve masking decades of grief and unanswered questions. David, seated near the hearth, watched her closely. His skepticism had grown sharper with every passing year, and now, in this house of memories and unspoken tragedies, his mistrust seemed almost tangible. He reached for his glass but hesitated, his eyes darting to the darkened corners of the room, as though daring the shadows to reveal themselves. Anna, quiet as always, perched on the edge of a faded armchair. The flames cast dancing shapes on her pale face, but she seemed untouched by the warmth. Eleanor had found her at the edge of their family's life, a child without roots, taken in as a gesture of salvation. Yet even now, years later, she remained an enigma, her connection to the family as tenuous as the fading garlands that lined the mantel. The rest of the room was filled with faces that flickered between boredom and unease. Cousins and in-laws whispered among themselves, their voices rising and falling like the draft in the chimney. Father Gregor, seated nearest the window, clasped his hands tightly, as if in silent prayer. His gaze lingered on the frost-laced glass, where faint patterns formed and dissipated, defying the stillness of the night. Hearth Manor had been abandoned for 2 decades, its halls silent since that fateful Christmas Eve in 1943. The fire that consumed the West Wing left scars both physical and unseen, but the most haunting loss was Peter Montgomery. Peter's portrait hung above the fireplace. His youthful face stared out, forever trapped in that painted moment. Whispers of his ghost had persisted in the years since, but no one dared speak them aloud tonight. The faint sound of footsteps above broke the silence. The family stilled, their eyes lifting to the ceiling. What would you do if you heard footsteps in an empty house? Share your thoughts below. The storm outside raged against the walls of Hearth Manor as Anna climbed the creaking staircase to the attic. The house had grown colder, the fire below struggling to hold its warmth. The family's murmurs faded as she reached the top landing, her breath visible in the frigid air. The attic door stood ajar, its rusty hinges crying out as she pushed it open. Inside, the shadows were long and jagged, cast by a single lantern flickering on the floor. The room was cluttered with relics of a forgotten life, dust-covered trunks, cracked mirrors, and faded photographs scattered across the floor. But it was the small wooden chest in the corner that caught Anna's attention. The truth was buried here, locked away with the echoes of a family's guilt. Anna hesitated, her fingers trembling as she unlatched the chest. Inside lay a worn leather diary, its pages fragile with age. She opened it carefully, revealing Peter's neat but desperate handwriting. The entries began innocently enough, accounts of Christmas preparations and snowy afternoons. But as she read further, the tone darkened, the words heavier. Peter had been accused of an unspeakable betrayal, one Eleanor refused to forgive. The family had locked him away in the attic, his pleas for understanding met with silence. In the final pages, his handwriting became erratic, the ink smudged as if written in haste. He wrote of a presence that visited him in the dark, offering him escape and vengeance in exchange for something unnamed. The last entry was a single line, "They will all pay, and the fire will cleanse their sins." Anna gasped, the diary slipping from her hands. She turned to leave, but the attic door slammed shut. Meanwhile, downstairs, the family had gathered in the drawing room, their nerves frayed by the mounting tension. The storm intensified, rattling the windows as snow piled higher against the doors. Father Gregor, who had been silent for most of the evening, rose suddenly, his movements stiff and unnatural. David frowned. "Father, are you all right?" Father Gregor turned slowly, his eyes glazed, his lips moving soundlessly. Then, in a voice that was not his own, he spoke. "You should have left this place." The lights flickered and went out. In the darkness, the family was no longer alone. The entity Peter had summoned now moved freely among them. Panic erupted. Eleanor shouted for the candles as shadows shifted unnaturally around the room. A guttural growl echoed, sending the cousins scrambling for the door, only to find it sealed by an unnatural force. Anna burst into the room, clutching the diary. "It's Peter. He's not alone. He brought something back with him." Her voice trembled as she recounted the details of the diary. The growl returned, louder this time, reverberating through the walls. The chandelier above began to sway, its crystals catching brief glints of moonlight. Father Gregor stepped forward, his face contorted into a grin that was not his own. Eleanor screamed as he lunged toward her, only to be held back by David and 2 other family members. The priest thrashed violently, his strength unnaturally amplified, but Anna's voice cut through the chaos. "We have to confront him," she said, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. "This won't stop until we acknowledge what was done to Peter, and what we allowed to happen." As the storm reached its peak, the family gathered in the dining hall, clutching whatever makeshift weapons they could find. Eleanor stood at the head of the table, her composure faltering as Anna placed the diary before her. "You knew," Anna said softly. "You let it happen." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as she confessed. "I thought I was protecting this family. I never meant for it to go this far." Her words were cut short as the air grew colder. The candles extinguished one by one, leaving only the faint glow of the snow-covered windows. A figure began to form at the far end of the room, its shape shifting and indistinct. It was no longer just Peter's ghost. It was the manifestation of every unspoken truth, every buried secret. And it wanted retribution. The entity moved closer, its presence oppressive. Anna stepped forward, clutching the diary. You wanted justice, didn't you? But this isn't what Peter would have wanted. The figure paused, its form flickering. Anna took a deep breath and stepped closer. Take me instead. I'm not part of this bloodline. I've done nothing to harm you or this family. The room fell silent. The entity loomed over Anna, its face becoming clearer. For a brief moment, it resembled Peter, his expression sorrowful. Then, with a deafening roar, it vanished. The storm ceased abruptly. The snow outside began to melt, revealing a pale morning light. The family sat in stunned silence, the weight of the night pressing heavily on them. Anna's place at the table was empty. On Christmas morning, the Montgomerys awoke to find an untouched gift beneath the tree. The note attached read, "Forgiven, but not forgotten." As the family opened the front doors, now free of snow. In the glass, Peter's reflection appeared, his hand raised in a final farewell. What do you think Anna's sacrifice truly meant? Could there have been another way? Share your theories below. If you enjoyed this chilling story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more spine-tingling tales, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a moment of the horror.